Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
No,
around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Hello everyone, good whatever time of day it is you're listening. This is Americans Watching the Footy. This is episode number 249, and this is another progress report.
The last of the progress reports, in fact, for this mid-season bye block of the fixture. We're going to be back to 9 games of footy, and actually 10 for the concluding round. Sadly, we're soon going to lose the art of Thursday nights, I believe.
I don't think that's until round 23, though.
All right, good. That's actually
And
good.
I know this because I'm going to Thursday night games in rounds 20, 21, and 22.
Excellent. And then round 23, maybe round 24, we might have a Wednesday in there.
I don't understand people complaining about having the buys all spread out. I think it's good, actually, because fewer overlaps, and I'd rather have a bunch of weeks with like 7 games instead of like 2 weeks with like 4 or 5.
My other question is, what would you put to fill the air on TV or elsewhere? Like, would you put the Witten Legends game at the middle of the season? Would there be something with the women's competition? I don't think so while the state leagues there are still going.
Now that's also like people who want Origin to be a thing. That would be where you could do it. But yeah, I like having the buys spread out because I don't like overlap games. Would I be okay with, just like 1 week with hardly any footy in the middle where, it's like, hey, this is the time to go out and like do other things? I prefer this.
I mean, back when we had started this in 2022, you proudly boasted that you hadn't gone out for a weekend in months when Shannon Gill did that piece with us. Shannon, who you could often hear with Jared Waitley for the Know Your History segments.
I will say, last Saturday night during round 15, it was nice to actually go out and drive people around because footy was done at like 1 a.m. with the Richmond Bulldogs game, and honestly, you could have tuned out by halftime of that.
I know round 19, I'm going to be impacted a little bit because of when I'm going to be going to my first ever game at Dodger Stadium.
This coming round, we've got our first Friday overlap of the year.
And this one's really fucking stupid.
Well, because it impacts you more than it impacts me.
I'm still considering watching Carcall instead.
Saturday, actually the game I'm most excited about this round is probably Sydney and Freo, and I'm probably not going to be watching that live.
Well, that's Last Chance Saloon for Sydney if there ever was one. Where are you going to be, though?
I'm going to be brewery hopping in Bend.
Bend, Oregon, one of Ethan's absolute favorite places, despite its lack of a baseball team.
Yeah, I mean, there is like a, college like summer league team or something, but that's really not the priority. The priority is just like all the really good breweries and things like that.
Yeah, and you'll be there with one of your friends. It's going to be Independence Day over here that weekend, so gonna get all fueled up for that, I guess. But we've got 4 teams to talk about for the progress reports, those who are on buys in round 16. 3 of them are most definitely in the finals race. You would expect at least 2 of them to make it. And then there's the 4th one. And we will be starting with the reigning premiers, the Brisbane Lions, who will certainly help their cause before the bye with that win at Cardinia Park, their first of that kind since 2003. That puts them up into 2nd, though it's a gap of 10 points between them and Collingwood. Remember, they had that draw against, of all teams, North on Mother's Day and had a 2-game skid before bouncing back with that win over the Caps. Their percentage is 113.4, and that is actually the 7th best. A few close wins in there. And I think the one worry with the Lions is just how much one injury is going to impact them more than anything else, that being the loss of Jack Payne. We don't doubt that this team can win another flag because of the depth they have all over, but the Harris Andrews-Jack Payne tandem is another level, and without him, I feel like it's almost too much of a burden on Andrews himself. Darcy Gardner was planned to come in and take that spot against the Cats. They really, I guess, didn't have anybody to take that then. How did you see their defensive strategy work against your own side?
Well, it was more that Geelong just ended up not capitalizing enough, not really taking advantage of it between both bad goal kicking and just dumb forward entries. Like, I think they were still way too eager to just lob it in. Now, I understand bombing it in more against a team that doesn't have Jack Payne, but if you're going to do that, you've got to like cut the field into halves and don't kick it to the half Harris Andrews is on. And they did not do that. They let Andrews do way too much there. So I'm more interested to see how other teams plan to exploit it, beginning with Port this week. I think Carlton, that'll actually be really interesting how Carlton tries to exploit it. And then I think the real test comes in that round 19 Friday nighter against the Dogs. We'll see what they can do against the likes of Sam Darcy, Aaron Naughton, and then the following week with the Q Clash, where you got to deal with protected species Jed Walter as well as Ben King.
It's been
Being the reigning premiers, you're not going to have an easy fixture. They've got 2 more trips to Victoria, those being Carlton and Collingwood. The away Q Clash.
I will be at the Collingwood game.
Right. The away Q Clash in between those in round 20, and also the trip to Optus to face Freo, because, of course, that's who they face in the West in round 23. Remember, it's only a 6-point gap from second all the way down to ninth. There's a lot of potential for slip-ups and shenanigans. Will I still back this team in to make the top 4? Obviously, I will.
On the run home, Max Lawton has them as the hardest remaining fixture. He projects them, or I guess Fox Footy as a whole projects them to finish 4th.
So in a qualifying final against Collingwood, oh boy. Great to be able to communicate with Max through socials. Actually, on the Fox Footy podcast, answered some of my questions around the SOS meter. And no, that's not talking about the Silvanis. It was about same old Suns. To get our Suns takes, go back and listen to the recap for this round or our progress reports from the week prior.
Projected ladder. Collingwood in first, they've got a big enough cushion that even with the difficult schedule, they'll be in good shape. Geelong projected second with what should be the easiest remaining schedule. They've gotten a lot of the tough games out of the way already. Now, there are still a couple of concerns there. I'll talk about those later, where I don't think second is a guarantee, but you feel good about at least 15 wins. I feel like third is probably the worst case scenario, thinking about percentage. But really, third through ninth could be an absolute mess all the way down to the final moments of round 24 if things go as forecasted, and Brisbane could be right in the middle of that. Now, I think we're clearly past the point of being concerned about their ability to play on the road. In fact, their 2 best wins this year have been at the G against Hawthorn and at Geelong, so I think that's out of the way. Just the biggest question to me is, they've played more games than anybody else, since March of last year. Can that fatigue catch up with them? And I think that's a very real concern and why it's so tough to repeat unless you're just by far the best team, which this team definitely has the ability to be. I don't think there's any debating whatsoever that this team has the ceiling to be outstanding. Now, what's really interesting to me are just the pieces and how they've added up on this team.
Traditionally, if you think, oh, the Lions are succeeding, must be just Lachie Neale fueling absolutely everything. And while Neale does remain the Lions clearance leader, the story from the middle this year has been less of Neale and much more Hugh McCluggage with the cleanest season he's had yet. McCluggage is averaging over 26 touches a game, and the efficiency, whether it's from the actual numbers or the eye test, is way, way up. You usually think about him as having a whole lot of chaos, and there's more control in this season. He's the Lions assist leader as well with 17, which puts him up pretty high for the overall rankings in the AFL. 17, in fact, puts him in a tie for second, along with Tyson Stengel and Ned Long. The leader with 24 assists is Ed Richards.
I think there's a case to be made that there's been a shift in like who you have to stop to beat the Lions.
Away from Neil, because it's much more at the source for him, with more the emphasis now on McCluggage and Will Ashcroft.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I think there is still a case to be made to just throw your tagger on Lockie Neal right away. There is totally still a case for that. But I also think the best way to approach Brisbane is probably be ready to shift your tag based on who's hot and which matchups they're thriving in. And I also think that just like the delta between Brisbane when Neal's having a good game and when he's not is not as big. Like, I've seen Brisbane lose plenty of games where he's played really well. I think the real like bellwether barometer determinant for these guys right now is actually probably Will Ashcroft.
It's some combination of McCluggage, Ashcroft, and either Cam Rayner or Zach Bailey. If you have,
I think Rayner, who got off to a pretty unremarkable start to the year, but has been really good lately. I thought he was brilliant in the game against Geelong before the bye.
12 goals in his last 7 games. We talked in the round 15 recap about how he's more of a wild card in terms of placement and impact than the other members of that watch out for these guys group for Brisbane. Zach Bailey had a hot start to the year, has definitely cooled off since I would say round 7, because by then he'd already kicked 15 of his goals.
So yeah, at this point, if I'm game planning for Brisbane, I think you kind of have to look at like Neil, Dunkley, and McCluggage as a unit. You know, it's like, all right, how can our unit match up with their unit? And then you really look at who can we use to limit Will Ashcroft as much as possible? Who can we use to make sure Cam Rayner doesn't go off? And how can we avoid Harris Andrews? Because especially now that Jack Payne's not in the picture, I think the goal defensively really is just like, take your chances on anyone not named Harris Andrews and just avoid him at all costs.
Whether it's
And
Gardner, whether it might be Ton Duday when he gets back from his concussion, we still yet to see Duday suit up in maroon in the AFL, but that's definitely a possibility, and I think a down game or two from Gardner could definitely trigger that change. Unlike last year where this team sometimes struggled to get off to the hot starts, they've now had some later game troubles. I think about, in particular, what happened against the Giants of the new forward order, though that was the game in which Payne was hurt. I'm not sure if there's been a real pattern in their defeats outside of just inaccuracy. And you could also say a lot of other things about the Adelaide loss round 13 because of how the conditions affected that and all sorts of other matters. That's a peculiar one to go back and look through.
A lot of self-inflicted damage in that loss.
I think I mentioned at that time that in all of their losses and their draw, they had kicked more behinds than goals, and that held with their 13-18 performance against the Giants. The expected score on that one, Lions fans don't look, but because I'm not a Lions fan, I am going to look. Expected score had the Lions by over 26 points. The Lions, despite having not caught the injury bug as much this year, it's rare that they've been with their entire best team because as of late, it's been Oscar McInerney who's been out. He's not been cited in the AFL since round
Number 9.
the draw against North. I think he's got a degenerative condition in his back, and so they've been very slowly ramping up his return. Darcy Fort has largely done his job, though you'd rather have Big O in there.
I don't think there's been really any sort of drop-off or difference, which is surprising to me because I think of McInerney as a pretty specific body type to match up with, being kind of one of the taller, lankier rucks. And just he's not a guy who's usually going to get into double-digit disposals, but can get crazy hit-out numbers where his stat line will look more like, even though he's not quite that body type, like a Jared Witz or Riley O'Brien. But I think between this and the grand final, I think it's fair to at least ask the question, can they do just fine without him? Is there a drop-off really between him and Fort? And I think there were a couple games where it felt significant, but I think overall they've actually done pretty well there. I will say the Melbourne game, it was a bit noticeable, but that's also a matter of, how would McInerney have matched up against Max Gone? Maybe it's just like you need it against the top-ranked rucks, but other than that, Fort's been able to hold his own. I think that's kind of the conclusion I'm drifting towards.
They have been linked to Riley O'Brien, who isn't much younger, and also Sam Draper as of late. So watch for that as a continuing thread going into the offseason for the Lions. Again, overall, pretty comfortable with where they are. Brandon Starcevich returned and actually kicked a goal, and his return may help allay some of the fears of Payne being out, though more often than not, Starcevich is on a mid-sized to smaller opponent. He can play a bit above his size, so the worries still remain, but Starcevich in means you can have Kalawachi be even more flexible. He missed that game sick against Geelong, so still, there are reinforcements to bring in. And we haven't even talked about the youngest crop of Lions, aside from Will Ashcroft, and you got to look to his draft class and more recently as well for some of the bigger rises, I'll say, for Brisbane. Jasper Fletcher had shown what he could do on the wing.
At this point, I just see him as like a distributing kind of halfback.
He could do that, has shown his stuff a couple times in the defensive one-on-ones also. He's become a much steadier player over the past year and a half. Obviously, Levi Ashcroft is starting to look steady. He's already averaging over 20 touches a game. But the real story, especially in the absence of the now retired Joe Danaher and with questions about on the forward setup, has been Logan Morris already kicking 30 goals. 30 goals to 11 behinds, 2 bags of 5 these past couple weeks, making him the youngest player to do that since Matthew Lloyd.
Plays bigger than 6'3". He's been taking on top defenders and winning out a lot of those one-on-ones and has really answered a lot of the concerns despite being, again, a totally different mold at forward than, the hole that was left by Danaher. This is going to be a team that's in prime time nearly every week the remainder of the season, other than that weird early afternoon Q clash. And the game against the Swans is the middle of a Saturday. But we're going to be talking about these guys a lot. They've got a really tough schedule. The question, in theory, there's a world where they could miss finals because there's, you assume 9 teams plus maybe the Swans going for 8 spots. But really, the question isn't so much if they're going to miss. You feel pretty darn good about their situation. It's a matter of where they enter finals at and just how do they hold up health-wise and fatigue-wise.
And as we've learned, winning for the bottom 4 finals isn't necessarily a problem for them. Yeah, they've got a Thursday coming up, a couple Fridays, a Saturday night primetime in there, and a standalone game round 22 that has definitely lost its luster hosting the Sydney Swans, but definitely a potential trip-up spot there. My sleeper pick for the year was the late in this past round. Do you remember who that was?
Bruce Reville?
Yes, he's only had 1 game in full this year, and that was against Richmond. The appearance against Geelong was his first since the round 5 win against the Dogs. So the Lions are undefeated with Bruce in there this year, and overall 15-1-1 when the Category B pickup is present. Had been getting into the 20s in disposals in the VFL before that, so well-warranted call-up. High running capacity, as we know. I don't think there's any shock in Bruce's game at this point. It's just very tough to crack this Lions 23 even when there are injuries.
My sleeper, Henry Smith, has not gotten the game. In part, that's a credit to Logan Morris drifting into that tall forward role.
And it's also due to a nagging foot injury. But we thought Smith was going to have to be the answer in some respects with the forward setup, with Danaher having been that second ruck as well. Really hasn't been a problem. And with Morris being on the rise, it's been less and less necessary to be concerned about the forward setup. They also did bring in Sam Day, who's got more experience as a ruck option. He came back in round 14.
When you need to load up the talls, you go with Day.
Smith is still young. He's 22, and rucks often take longer to develop. As the cricket continues in the background while we record, because we enjoy the fact that there's cricket on at convenient times for us, we spin once again.
Yeah, we're watching Major League Cricket between Texas Super Kings and MI New York. The stadium holds about 7,000, and it looks like they've got about 7,000, which is great. There's a lot of whistles, a lot of yellow flags. This is good.
Yes, and you've got the combination of like the Super Kings and MI allure to the biggest rivalry coming over from India. Meanwhile, our conversation is going to shift to Essendon, who have the, yikes, it's bad to look at, the third worst percentage, 77.5. They just have not been able to score. Only 2 teams have scored fewer points than them. That's the bottom 2. Essendon sit at 6 and 8 in 14th and have lost 4 in a row to definitely skid into the bye. I mean, it's how Essendon seasons
Now, they
often...
also have played 1 fewer game.
It is how Essendon seasons often go, that they can start decently well and then skid on into the bye. They did lose their first 2, but then went on a stretch winning 6 of 8. Having said that, none of those wins really have much value. Like if you're making power rankings or trying to do stuff like a college football ranking, the conversation, I mean, I can already hear like a fine bomb caller going, but Essendon ain't beat nobody.
I mean, they beat a slumping Swans team that gave away 7 or 8 50-meter penalties, and they beat a Port team that looked pretty crappy that night and then continued to look crappy for a while after that.
Single goal wins against West Coast and North also. I told you that Essendon-North rivalry always ends up being close, no matter the skill level. And they did beat Richmond for their most recent win by 23 in Dreamtime. But that was portending a rougher patch for Richmond. So, yeah, the ain't beat nobody discourse is loud with these fellers. They still have 2 games to go against the Suns. That'll bookend their post-bye schedule. And they also have to go to the SCG. Only 2 trips outside Victoria for the rest of the year, but that isn't the concern with these fellers. The concern is kind of everything on the field, and holy injury list Batman, it's gotten worse. The players who are injured, I've written in red.
Everything's in red.
Yeah, I know.
Alternatively, what? It's just an ordinary Essendon injury. Oh my goodness! Scotty!
You could get Jordan Ridley back soon, which would mean you might actually get him and Jaden Laverde together for a couple games. That almost never happens. Like, one's always hurt. Guys like Saad Al-Hali. We don't know a timetable on Harrison Jones, although we do know that looked a lot worse than it ended up being, so he should be back by year's end.
Let's pause about Redmond, because he and Langford reported discomfort in recent sessions, and Darcy Parish might have done his calf again. Mitch Cleary reported that Langford had another quad strain that might keep him out for the rest of the year.
I knew about Langford. I did not remember Redmond. We don't know how long Ben Mackay is going to be out. Yeah, Harry Jones, remember, he had that ankle injury that looked like awful and turned out to be, okay, nowhere near as bad as we thought. Sam Draper out for the year.
Unit lost.
Lewis Hayes, who I really liked and I believe was my sleeper, out for the year.
Unit lost.
And Tom Edwards out for the year too.
Unit lost.
And he had looked promising. Nick Bryan out for the year. So
Unit lost.
Full-time ruck Todd Goldstein. Do love that. Don't love how we got there, but love Todd Goldstein.
Goldstein and Peter Wright is a perfectly serviceable second ruck option. Rough start for him. Put that behind him now. But as a team, obviously, it's too little too late. But you got to start looking at, okay, what form can be a positive going into the 2025 offseason, looking to March 2026.
I will say Peter Wright has also shown value just as like a full field mark lately. So he's been enjoyable to watch. My thing with Essendon as a whole right now, though, you know, like this recent wave of soft tissue injuries makes you think just like, is anything going to change? Because if you put this under a microscope, I think it would be fair to say, hey, this could be one of those seasons it sucks short term, but all the injuries mean you get to look at who's available in-house, get a chance to figure out what the plan is going to be moving forward. You have an assessment of your depth and your up-and-comers. The problem is, I don't think there's reason to believe that this club has the infrastructure and the personnel and the coaching to actually capitalize on this. It feels like they're always a year or two away. And until that changes, until we actually see it, I think the fans have every right to remain skeptical. It's kind of like the Chicago White Sox, except the Pope isn't an Essendon fan as far as we know.
Would be cool if you were. I would love for a Pope to know about the footy.
Basically, like with the White Sox, there are all these prospects that you look at and say, like, yeah, I really like what they have coming. But it's like, do you trust the White Sox to get the most out of them and develop them? Whereas, like, we trust their talent identification, but we have all the reason to be skeptical of the development. And I think we could say the same here with Essendon, combined with we can't trust them to keep guys healthy, because at this point, it's like the number of soft tissue injuries is to a level where you have to ask, like,
it's West Coastian.
Yeah, and it's like how a few years ago, after all the ACL and Achilles injuries, the Baltimore Ravens totally changed their offseason training and conditioning stuff. And you got to ask, like, is there something like that that needs to be addressed here? And again, while I like the pieces, if you just look at, like, the list itself, you could easily see this being a team that within a year or two is playing and maybe even winning a final. But because it's Essendon, because of the, like, broader structure and the people up top, you have every reason to be skeptical. And I think that Essendon fans, well, the ones we follow seem to be pretty cognizant of the fact that this year they have been cursed by injuries, and this could be a year that helps them big picture. I think the Essendon fan base as a whole at this point just wants to see them, A, get to a final, and B, win one. And I totally get at this point why you would not want to be patient and want to stay the course, and why you'd want to be skeptical.
I would rather see Essendon win a final than Gold Coast, and I've said this how many times now? I'm going to keep with this. We were talking about Wright's utility, his use as a full field mark. I'd say he matches pretty well with what they've been able to get out of Nate Caddy, because Caddy has been able to fucking mark everything, and the excitement that he brings makes it all that much sadder that Essendon are struggling so much elsewhere, given he has been the most accurate kick, 15-16 so far this year. But the value there is apparent, and he is still a teenager. He actually has your birthday, Ethan.
Oh, shit. Cool. You love the athletic upside, goal kicking that can get straightened out over time. He's shown the pieces to continue to evolve.
Who else can we say that about, though, for Essendon? Angus Clark came in and impressed on debut in Dreamtime with 3 goals. Didn't like how he was slid back after that, because I think he's better there on the half-forward flank. And you've got enough wing options with the likes of Xavier Dersma, who I still am going to be a big fan of, regardless of where he ends up. I wonder if Essendon might try and make a play for his brother, because it sounds like Zane is not liking life at North. But the question is, are these guys going to get the time that they need in the AFL? Ben Hobbs and Elijah Sadas, Knock Dead Ben and Varna, as we call them, are in selection purgatory. Sadas in particular. And you have seen them get, 11 debuts now this year? The most recent being Vigo Vizentini. He did decently enough against Luke Jackson, and I'll compliment him for that. I mean, going up against Luke Jackson on debut is no easy job, but
it's a little bit funny
how they've gotten all these brand new guys games, and they slid Zach Merrick out of the middle and to halfback and wing, which I'm not a fan of, and yet they still aren't trying Hobbs and Sadas in the main setup nearly enough.
Like Sadas in particular, if you're able to look at this rationally and say, okay, we're not playing finals this year, we're just so beaten up, like that is the exact guy you want to give games to. You have a chance to actually give him like 2 months straight in the team, and they haven't done that, and that makes no sense.
This is a guy who's averaging in his 6 VFL games this year 33.33, repeating, of course, touches and 5 tackles.
You have all the incentive to try him out and figure out if he can do this or not. Tell you what I've actually really liked about this team this year. Now, instead of complaining about Zach Merritt getting taken out of the midfield, which just makes no sense.
It's going to be Nick Martin going in the midfield that you like.
It's just Nick Martin as a whole this year, where in past years, I think at times he's been overhyped because he's had uncontested possessions that consist of uncontested kick to him, followed by kick to another uncontested possession. And it's just been there was a game where he had 44 disposals, and it was okay, maybe 3 of those had any sort of heightened skill or degree of difficulty to them. I think this year, just his individual skill, no matter what role he's been in, has been on display. Some of the pickups off of bounces, some of the little crumbs, just little instinctual things combined with physical ability that are just ridiculous and incredibly fun to watch, no matter how well or poorly the team is playing. I guess the best comparison would be watching a really gifted stick handler in the NHL.
Is there a player that you're thinking of with that's a good comparison here?
Not really. I mean, any good stick handler, but just Nick Martin has become so much more fun to watch this year. They're really letting him show off his capabilities, and that's been something that no matter how well or poorly this team plays, he has been good for a moment or two in pretty much every game. Kind of like Harry Sheezel in past years, whereas except, with Sheezel, it would be an overhead handball or something, whereas with Martin, it's been some really crafty pickup or knock on.
And he's also still kicked 11 goals this year. So the touches have been in meaningful spots and have just been meaningful themselves because he's given them value. Alexei Kovalev is one that I might think of. Kovalev was a very high-level goal scorer for a lot of his career, scored over 400 of them, but he stands out to me as always someone who handled the puck really smoothly.
The first thing I think of is just Connor McDavid, except McDavid, what I think makes him so impressive is just his ability to do things at breakneck speed that other guys can only do at normal speed. Where normally, the faster you move, the sloppier you get, and that doesn't really happen for McDavid. So I don't know if that's the most accurate comparison for Martin.
McDavid is also just so much more than that. So I'm going to stay away from that level of comparison. I think I like what I said with Alexei Kovalev.
Yeah, that's not bad.
I'm not sure how many listeners will know who that is, especially Australians, but you
can find highlights.
I mean, the guy was a long tenured player too. You got plenty of highlights for him. No, Martin's been a positive. The whole Martin, Caldwell, Durham combination with Caldwell and Durham and Merritt when he's been in there doing the dirtier work and Martin capitalizing off it. That's a good formula. The problems are more in each 50 for Essendon, and I'm glad that there has been experimentation there, whether it's by force from injury or by choice. Defensively, it's been much more by force. We talked about the litany of injuries there. Lachlan Blackiston had a much better second game than first because Shannon Neal was his opponent in the first game.
And debuts are just hard in general. Jackson Pryor has largely struggled but played a little better as of late, but it sucks. Zach Reed, who went from being just horrendous in that early loss to the Crows where they gave up 161, which I think is still the highest score conceded this year.
I believe so. He's also our worst on round for that one, but he hasn't replicated anything like that since. And of course, because it's Essendon, he's on the sidelines. Pryor, by the way, my sleeper pick for the year, came over from Brisbane later on, asked for his release and was granted it at the club where his father was a premiership player. Not a great one-on-one defender by any means. So Essendon, I don't think really needed him as much. Although
I think they miscast him a little at times.
Although the struggles that Andrew McGrath, born of course in Mississauga, Ontario, has had, Pryor has filled that in a bit more. Though I feel like the response they gave to McGrath's struggles is to put Merritt back, which confounds me.
Yeah, McGrath has been one of the bigger disappointments on this team, just kind of a turnover machine, which if you're someone who's entrusted as a ball mover and entrusted to rack up a bunch of uncontested possessions, you can't do that. Him and Mason Redmond both have disappointed on that front. Redmond's had a couple decent games, but McGrath, it's been a pretty disappointing year as a whole.
McGrath with over 200 contested possessions. The only other ones like that for Essendon are Martin, Merritt, and Archie Roberts, who I do like patrolling the outside and has been entrusted with more of that responsibility kicking from the back in recent times. That's another good move. Again, the young pieces are there, but I don't trust the staff above them, including Brad Scott, including conditioning, to not just put the pieces in the right place, but keep them on the oval. I think even with the injuries, I would consider Brad Scott's seat among the hotter ones in the AFL.
As Archie Roberts has been good, unfortunately, Archie Perkins has been a disappointment. Last year, he started the year on fire. Stam Durham has been pretty decent and then got suspended. What was his suspension for? Was it a bump?
Yeah, was that the high bump on Adam Chera?
Yes, it was. I just checked. So he will be back coming out of the bye. That'll help. He's been one of their better players. He's crafty offensively, pretty skilled playmaker. His continued development has been nice. And then I guess my sleeper, one of the sadder ones this year, was Lewis Hayes, who I loved in the community series. I was like, why is he not getting a game? Why is Jackson Pryor getting these matchups? He gets in, he looks good, he tears his ACL. And that's just kind of been the story of this season for Essendon.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did. How did you know that number, Ethan? Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters. Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed. It's so easy you can edit it while drunk. And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do. Best of all, it's completely free. Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
Again, this is episode 249 of Americans Watching the Footy, so hopefully somebody can chair us off for the next one wherever we are, however unlikely that may be. We did see two people kind of get chaired off.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
Our cousin and her husband.
They didn't leave on the chairs, though.
Yeah, true. Still, though, the horror is as close as we're going to get. I'm Benjamin Castle. Find me on Twitter individually at BenjaminHK01.
I'm on Twitter at Castle Media, Castle with a K. I'm Ethan Castle. Brian Harambe is our executive producer. He's on Instagram at Cat Named Brian. He's been sitting right next to me like all day.
Collectively, we are at Americans Footy on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. The memes have been spicy as of late, particularly thanks to Carlton. They know we're coming. The teams we have remaining on the wheel double up against each other. And in fact, they'll be meeting again in round 18. Do you look forward to that, Ethan?
I don't know. I look forward to it more than I would if it was at home, but I'm not, thrilled about it. The two toughest games remaining for the Cats by far, I think, are the two in New South Wales. Not that I love facing the Saints, and Port should definitely be better than they were last time, but we can talk about all of that in a moment.
When you paused after saying the, I thought you were going to talk about the orange team who showed up on our wheel just now. So I guess just like a week ago, our own favorite teams are going to be last up. For now, though, the Giants are sitting outside the top 8 as we record on percentage, and it's a pretty substantial percentage gap against the other teams with 36 points. They're sitting at 107.6, while the Gold Coast Suns, who have a game in hand, are at 120.3, and the Western Bulldogs, because they're the Bulldogs, are at 131.5. So ground to be made up in percentage and just in pure wins. And they're going to have to do that for a bit here still without Sam Taylor. I mean, there have been a lot of outs that have been notable for this team. They were lacking Josh Kelly for a decent stretch. And when they were struggling against Frio, for example, I really thought about how Kelly is the glue to that midfield. They've been without Steven Tenilio for a while, and he will be returning through the VFL.
I think the general thing about this GWS team as a whole is, I don't know. I thought at the start of the year this was a really established good team, and then really ever since that really ugly loss at Adelaide in round 6, I never know what they're going to give me week to week, quarter to quarter. I think at this point they are appointment viewing because anything can happen at any time, which, like, if you're not playing against them is great. Like, I know I said, in theory, not all that excited for them facing West Coast this Friday. Like, Collingwood Carlton is obviously the bigger deal, but anything could happen.
I mean, the Eagles did play better this past week too, so there's that to factor in. I was not nearly as high on the Giants being established because you just kind of see the profile of this team, and there's a bit of a gap in the mid-age profile. They've got younger pieces that are lighting things up. Aaron Cadman is totally coming to his own these past few weeks as part of the new forward order, brother, with him alongside Jesse Hogan, who might actually be rested for an extra week if you do that against anybody. It is the Eagles, and Callum Brown, who is a forward,
who I would love to see at Geelong if they don't really have a space for him moving forward.
Last week, you absolutely loved Harvey Thomas, and his second half was one of the reasons why the Giants were able to rebound and defeat the Suns of the Expansion Cup, though it was by far from the main reason. Thomas, still just 19 years old, developing in instincts and IQ. I think he's going to be a real mainstay for this team.
I feel the same way about Darcy Jones and his helmet. I know you have to mention his helmet.
Well, Jones had some real midfield time while Kelly was out, and that had also worked, so that's encouraging. I guess if you're looking like a middle age profile for this team, is 24 middle age? If so, then Tom Green is in there. He'd been accumulating a lot, and these past few weeks, as the Giants have won 4 of 5, 5 of 7, his touches have started to get more meaningful. I think there was a real turning point in perhaps that Geelong game.
Yeah, his efficiency's been like regularly in the 70 to 80% range, which with the number of contested possessions and ground ball gets he racks up, you like happily take that. If you told me that was going on, I would think like, oh wow, this team's got to be like in line for a top 4 spot for sure, right? And instead, they could end up on the outside looking in. Yeah, Box Footy projects them as the one to miss. They've got all those teams 3rd through 8th between 14 and 15 wins, and then they project the Giants at 13.5. So there was totally a world where this team could miss finals. There was also very much a world where this team could win the whole thing, and I wouldn't be shocked at all. They were my pick at the start of the year, actually, to win the whole thing.
Which was foolish.
And this is based in a lot of reason, though. I think, first off, they've got a loaded list. Even with the injury situations, you've had guys that have struggled to get games that would be in every week at other clubs. You have a premiership defense, for sure, anchored by the currently injured Sam Taylor and Jack Buckley.
With Buckley out, Legalier needs to be better than he was this past week.
Or the last time they played, I guess.
Yeah, you get the point. Or maybe Connor Iden takes on more of a taller responsibility. I'll trust Iden to do whatever he needs to. My bigger issues with the Giants' back setup have been the Lockies, Ash and Whitfield, accumulating.
There are times this year when I think Ash has been good. I think the last month has not been that. Whitfield at times has been solid. I've liked when they've actually led him into more of a midfield role because he is pretty skilled. And they had to do some more of that when Finn Callahan was out. I don't know of too many GWS pods, but I don't know of people who are not affiliated with GWS that like Finn Callahan as much as we do. I fucking love this guy.
The Squinters definitely love him.
I think there's some similarities in his game to Jordan Dawson in the long kick ability and ability to play through the corridor, and that he can be physical when he needs to, but I think he is a much more accurate kick than Dawson. Even if he doesn't like have those, Super Saiyan captain moments like Dawson, I think Finn Callahan's phenomenal.
He's also a higher pressure player than Dawson. In his 5 most recent games, he's had at least 7 tackles in 4 of them.
Tom Green is the type of guy to win a traditional Brownlow. Finn Callahan would probably be more likely than Tom Green to win coaches' votes or America's Brownlow stuff.
Not this year.
Yeah, missing time injured didn't help, and Green's been very sharp lately. But yeah, Finn Callahan should be a household name in the footy world at this point.
And is it because he's a Giant?
At least in part. And yet, you look at this team, you think, man, how do they ever lose a game? And instead, not only do they lose games, they've won 4 games that they've lost on expected score.
And those losses have been a variety of different places because this team plays everywhere. They lost 2 games in Canberra, 1 to the Bulldogs and 1 to Port. Really poor effort there against the Power. They lost at the Showground to Freo, and they've lost away tests against Hawthorn, Adelaide, and Sydney. That's how they are at those 6 losses right now. And just based on the remaining schedule, you should see 4 wins for them. Eagles.
Oh, actually, I was wrong. They've lost 5 games on expected score that they've won.
Holy.
Round 1 against the D's, and then Geelong, Richmond, Brisbane, Gold Coast. And we talked already about Phil Davis singing his siren song to distract wayward forwards. So in the middle of that, you've had games like the Carlton game where they've looked legitimately awesome. You've had games like the Crows game and the Bulldogs game where they just completely shit themselves. And the Freo game, which was when the Dockers hadn't even been playing well.
And then you combine that with the slow starts that forced them to go on the comeback route against the Queenslanders these past 2 weeks.
And yet I look at this roster and I still think they're phenomenal. Now there's been Harry Himmelberg's had a down year. Jacob Ware started the year great and has cooled off.
Himmelberg's an interesting case. Even with Buckley leading the defense in Taylor's absence, Himmelberg played a fuller field role against the Suns and worked into that game well. So I think I'd back him in for that for now, but his year has not been as it should be. In addition, some other injuries that are worth noting. Brent Daniels has had a couple of them. There was, I think, an abdominal one, and then currently no clear timeline for his adductor. They've lost Cody Angove, Connor Stone, and most dishearteningly, Khaled Ward for the season, though I know Ward is back at the club right now.
I liked Angove, and it's the other reason I'm so optimistic about this team, and the reason I think there's another level to reach, is Angove has been one of so many younger guys that have impressed me. Joe Fonte hasn't really taken that next step, but he's had moments. I've really liked Toby McMullen, who's only 20. Josiah Delana, in his brief cameos as a sub, has been a spark plug and just a guy with really high footy IQ who gets key knock-ons. Harry Rouston lately has been really satisfying to watch. I fully believe in this team pieces-wise. And I just don't know if, it's a mix of injuries or failing to fully mesh or what it is that's made this team such an enigma week in, week out. I think some of it also is just, that reliance on Ash and Whitfield instead of some of the other pieces that I think could really carry this team.
Do you want Iden to have more of the kicking responsibility then? Do you want Callahan to slide further back outside of stoppage?
I think Iden definitely. Callahan is a tricky one because I love him going through the middle. Maybe if Cornelio gets back and gets towards that level he used to play at, I'd be interested. I think that is something to consider. It's just Cornelio, when healthy, has not been the player he used to be, which, he's 31.
Overall, I still insist, there are 4 more wins in this team. The question is there a 5th?
It's tricky because you look at some of the remaining games, you have a couple teams back-to-back, the 2 games that I'll be at, opponents that they've had major problems with. The Swans at home, and then the Dogs at Marvel. You also have the trip to Gold Coast. We can feel pretty good about West Coast, Essendon, North, and I guess St. Kilda.
Could be a make or break game round 24. And still then they might have to wait on the Suns and Bombers.
Yeah. One of the Saints or Cats or Suns, you feel like they should win. It's just, can they beat one of the Swans or Dogs? Do that, and you probably play finals. Beat both, and you could even afford to slip up against someone you have no business losing to.
My sleeper for the Giants this year is one of the guys who's out for the year. So I guess I could take a mulligan or kind of neutral at least, no real thumb ratings on Connor Stone. Played 7 games, his most involved yet at the AFL level. And with no sub appearances, it meant we're actually able to see his full capabilities. Used in a rebounding role a fair number of times, average 14 a game. Mid to tall height, I like what he can provide. It's a matter of just where on the oval. and he's pretty versatile. Like, he's someone they could really use right now, I think, when you're talking about cleanliness from the back, or just having different pieces there to try carry a bit more of the load outside of the Lockies.
Joe Fonte's my sleeper, and he's had a couple of games where, you can see like why they've called him Fontempelli, where he's just like a super high class, high quality touch, but he's still getting like acclimated to the AFL level. I think if we were to rate this one on like a scale of, 2 thumbs down to 2 thumbs up, I'd right now put it somewhere between neutral and 1 thumb up.
As would I. It's a mix of clean movement, but also still being a pressure player. So that's a fun combination. We haven't seen him get more than 17 touches yet, so I want to see what he could do with more of the ball. The one highlight that I really remember for him this year was this huge leap that he had a couple weeks ago, and he decided to spoil, and I believe it led to a goal.
Also, a shout out to one of our favorite Giants fans, Rick Shabani. Have not seen how his LA Dragons did this weekend. I believe they're at the Cali Cup in Sacramento, and I totally would have gone and watched footy in triple-digit heat, but I was working.
I mean, I've already watched baseball in triple-digit heat this month.
Was that Lake Elsinore?
Lakey, yup. Thank goodness I had enough shade around me. Dry heat, though, I am okay with. One more time until So You Didn't Crack the 8. We gotta spin the wheel here. Not like everything already says Geelong. Now they're in 4th as we speak, but with the easy run home they have, 2nd is most certainly attainable. They've still got Richmond twice, North, though that is at Marvel, and Essendon is coming down the highway too. They've still got 4 games at Cardinia Park. Those tend to be backloaded.
I think that's in part because, you have the country game and Easter Monday and, a lot of games at the G earlier on in the year. I'm going to let you start and talk about this team, and then I'll try to keep things relatively concise because I talk about them a lot already.
Yeah, you do. I mean, we tend to spend more time talking about the Cats and Eagles and their games than any other because that's who we are. It's only natural. I don't want to completely write off the performance last week, though it was a complete X-score pisser.
I mean, look, they did not deserve to win despite expected score. They could have made things closer. It was a stinker.
And I think you're granted one of those, as Ethan granted North, and they immediately said, bet. But coming into that, the Cats had won 5 in a row, though I did value 2 wins at that time, those being the home wins against the Dogs and the Suns. The Suns game, also not a pretty one, but enough class when it mattered, including from Cameron and from Stengel. You've had one of them going off in like actual important moments of the games most of the year, and then I know Ethan still trusts Ollie Dempsey as a 4th quarter player in particular, the rising star from this past year. I want to see more of Dempsey earlier, though, and I'll insist on that.
You highlighted the Dogs and Suns wins, but I think there are 2 other like real signature wins, actually 3 really. So I've thought about this a lot lately. This is kind of like a regular shower thought thing for me.
Is it also a car thought?
Yeah. Like the term in college sports, when building a resume for like college football playoff selection or back when it was actually hard to make a college football playoff, or for the NCAA tournament for basketball is, the signature win, or you could also just call it, the we demand to be taken seriously wins. And I think Geelong actually has 3 of them where like, I've talked about with a couple of teams like the Crows. I just need to see like 1 really.
Hey, they beat the Crows to start.
Gather round.
That's one of the 3.
They also won Easter Monday despite making us sweat through that, and survived an after the siren scare against Collingwood.
Those are the others.
And sandwiched between those were just a stylistic mismatch against Carlton, who you are probably quite glad are not a double up for your Cats.
I mean, I'd love to play them again the way they currently are going, but I think it's just a bad matchup.
In the same way that Brisbane are ?
I don't know how much Brisbane is a bad matchup and how much is we played poorly, whereas Carlton, it's kind of just like, I feel like Carlton kind of does to us what we've done to Essendon many times and just run straight through them in the middle.
and rebound defense is the biggest worry for Geelong.
More so overlap defense. Like, I think that's a much bigger issue than rebound. Although against Brisbane, you did see basically the whole trend Brisbane would go on would be intercept off of a really bad, dumb, easily avoidable turnover, 2 or 3 kicks down the middle, then 1 to the wing, and then from the wing, centering ball into the forward 50, mark, goal.
And whether or not you go out to the wing, the overlap and rebound problems are nothing new for this team. It was a concern even before Patrick Dangerfield was moved forward, partially through the addition of Bailey Smith. And those aren't really areas where Smith excels. So defensive midfield work is the biggest issue right now, and they need pieces other than Tom Atkins to be able to provide that, because you can count on their non-captain Captain Atkins in that sense.
Yeah, Jack Bowes, I'm not super high on. I like him as more of like a halfback that occasionally flirts with the midfield, much more than I like him as a defensive midfielder. There's actually something there.
But that's not what you need.
No, I think actually when you can put him in that role, he can do just fine. It's just a matter of who steps into the midfield more, and it's not like you want to move, say, Zach Guthrie or something. Maybe you could put Lawson Humphreys in there more.
I mean, we've seen more full ground utility for him popping up for a couple goals, including one in the jumper he designed alongside his sister.
If this is his version of a sophomore slump, you totally take it. But I still think he's only had 1 or 2 games this year where he's really like gotten off and done what I think he's capable of. He hasn't gotten to do quite as much on the wing and launching attacks. I think some of that's because of the presence of Jed Buse and Mitch Duncan, although boy, in that Brisbane game, Duncan looked just slow and old. Like,
Duncan can't be the solution. I'm sorry.
No, I like Duncan in the sub role. And you know who else actually has kind of impeded on what Humphreys does well? Someone that I was really low on earlier this year and I'm totally back in on, and that's Mark O'Connor.
If you can get O'Connor or his fellow Irishman, Oisin Mullen, to be steadier as defensive mids. The other one that I would consider is someone who didn't play against Brisbane, and that's a shame considering what he had done the week prior, that being Ted Closey. Had 15 disposals and 4 clearances, as well as 8 tackles against the Suns. And if you can get him as that additional pressure midfielder, then I think that'll solve your problems, or at least help a good bit. So Atkins along with Closey and an Irishman.
I think the solution probably relies mostly on O'Connor and Mullen, where Mullen, at the start of the year, there was a lot of valid question over why is he in the team. And now he's kind of just become this super tagger who will maybe get in on 1 or 2 clearances with O'Connor over the course of a game. But more than anything, it's just like his athletic ability and speed has allowed him to be a really valuable shutdown defender. And like, I thought this past week, he should have probably been switched onto Will Ashcroft. And that was a mistake not doing that. Like, I trust Mullen's ability to limit opponents. I just don't know if there's, like, who's that next guy besides Holmes, Smith, and Atkins that's going to get the clearances and rack up a few more possessions. I mean, I would like to see Dempsey more in the midfield. I trust his ability there. Let's talk Max Holmes and Bailey Smith. The Dash brothers is the name they've picked up. They've both been insane meters gain numbers. Both have been racking up disposals. Bailey Smith, save for the 2 Brisbane games, I think has really done what's been asked of him. He doesn't have to be the most efficient player, but just someone else who can stand up to opposing midfielders, rack up clearances and possessions, and just kind of be everywhere. And he has done that. He's had a couple of great games, like the Freo game, his very first. Again, the Brisbane games have not been good, but overall he has done what's been asked of him. And Max Holmes started the year quietly, and over the last few weeks has played better than he did in the first 9 or 10 rounds of 2024, which I thought was honestly impossible. He's been super fast, super efficient, along the wing, in the middle, everywhere. He's pretty much just done everything and had a couple of monster games.
Well, Smith had his 41 in the country game against Essendon, but Holmes also brought up 40 the week prior to that against the Suns. So which one are you thinking about?
That Essendon game, Smith had 41, and I thought Holmes was even better. He had a goal from 36, 8 clearances, over 80% efficiency with about a third contested, 7 score involvements, 7 intercepts, 6 center clearances, 10 inside 50s, and he basically broke champion data.
Was that the 36.5?
That was. Now, Bailey Smith's 41 came with 10 turnovers and below 60% efficiency, and don't get me wrong, he was valuable. He served a purpose, but that was the best game of Max Holmes' career, honestly. Also 8 bounces and 21 pressure acts.
Didn't Max have 11 in a game last year?
I think so. Oh, and 13 ground ball gets.
Just go back through those whole stats is the point. You need the efficiency from Holmes because you're not going to get it from Smith.
He and Smith play off each other very well. But I'm just so impressed that with Max Holmes, you would have thought, best case scenario, he replicates what he did first 10 or so rounds of last year. And these last few weeks, he's been even better. And there are a lot of other things to be optimistic about, too. Start of the year, Tom Stewart looked like he wasn't 100%. He's rounded into form lately. That's been an enormous positive. Even with all the disappointment of that Brisbane game, that was a plus. He was really sharp in the Essendon game as well. Jack Henry might just be the number 1 defender now.
He is. Why is that
Which
a
is
question?
funny because first half of last year, he was so bad, improved a lot as the year went on. And then, I think it's fair to say they beat GWS if he plays because Sam DeConing couldn't match up with Jesse Hogan. And DeConing's been decent. He's still been fine. But when you have all 3 of Henry, DeConing, and Stewart, you feel really good. Now, DeConing's out a few weeks with a AC joint injury. Jake Kolajashny is yet to get a game yet this year.
Still unsure about his timeline. And it says Cam Guthrie could be back this week in the VFL, but who the fuck knows? It's Cam Guthrie. Thinking about defense,
I would love to see Cam Guthrie get an AFL game by the end of July. And while in past years, he's been hurt so much and it's been hard for him to get just into rhythm, that's where having another just big time midfielder in Bailey Smith means he doesn't have to do as much. They're not going to be asking anywhere near as much of him if he does get in there. So where are the concerns?
Jack Henry is this team's best one-on-one defender. That's clear. The sweeping role is still where Stewart has his greatest value and where Zach Guthrie can contribute the most as well. If you've got Zach going, it can offset some of the absence somewhere in there. I'm just not sure exactly where. Other question here when we're looking at defense is where exactly do you see Connor O'Sullivan fitting into the mix if everything is healthy? Is O'Sullivan still in your steady 18 or 22? And where do you think would be his best specialized role?
I've said my thing about O'Sullivan a few times. I love how they've utilized him in this rebound wing role. I really like his speed and ball use. Was it the Suns game? He had a game where he was just unbelievable on an efficiency level and all the underlying stats were amazing. I want to say that was the Suns game. His future is probably as a key defender who can spring forward and launch attacks when needed. And I'm more and more excited about his versatility and just what he's able to do down the road. Physically, he's still got some growing to do muscle-wise. You know what? It was not the Suns game. I think it was the game at West Coast. Yeah. He had gotten rested against the Dogs. And then against West Coast came out and 7 score involvements, 11 intercepts, 90% efficiency with half of his possessions contested on a 20 disposal, 2 assist game. But it's interesting where we kind of had a few guys as individuals step on each other's toes a bit where Humphreys hasn't been able to do as much because of some of that. But O'Sullivan, first few rounds this year, and he's cooled off a bit since, but first few rounds this year, he was rising star favorite and could still leverage his way back into that conversation. There are a lot of worthy candidates right now. What satisfies me with O'Sullivan, I'd rather not have him in defense until, he has that huge offseason in the weight room where he makes some fucking gains, capital G gains. But you can throw him in there when needed. He's gotten better in that role. And just to have the ability to slide him around is a luxury that I was not expecting. Midfield depth we talked about as an issue. Efficiency in the midfield could be a concern. The biggest thing is just there are times when the forward structure hasn't looked great. And it's funny because, Patrick Dangerfield's mostly played forward. And there's been I think some valid questions over, how does his forward presence infringe on like what Jeremy Cameron's trying to do? And then the question of like, who's that next guy? I love Shannon Neal's potential still. The hands have been better lately. He's had a couple of much better games, including the Essendon game. He was pretty good against West Coast as well, if I recall correctly. But like Ollie Henry, I think getting dropped, they called it managed, but dropped, and game where he's been in the sub role, I think the message has gotten through, and he's learned that he needs to put on some more pressure. Tyson Stengel's been better in that capacity as well, but like I'd still love to have another weapon there, because there are games when Jeremy Cameron's been held in check, and it's like, what else do we go to? In future years, I would love to recruit Callum Brown from GWS, like I've said, because, there are times when he hasn't even been able to get in the lineup at GWS, which is insane.
I feel like that should be put to bed with the new forward order being what it is, but we shall see. Because Callum Brown, believe it or not, is a forward.
We say this because he had like this great 4-goal game in terrible weather a couple years ago, and then they tried throwing him in as a defender. But I just think like physically and in terms of his like offensive profile, like he is kind of a missing piece that you would love to have. And this is where if mid-season trades were a thing, you'd have the rare like trade between two contenders possibly, instead of just, the typical bad team trades good player to good team for future prospects.
And draft picks, because
I consider draft picks as a part of like future prospects, whether we're looking at that through, the lens of like any other sports trade deadline.
By the way, we've gone on a good bit about each of our sleeper picks already. Yours was O'Sullivan, and that felt fairly obvious given the flashes that he'd already shown and being a first-round pick.
The coolest thing is that I didn't think he was going to be doing this as, a wing at times. That was not expected.
And Closey was mine. He wasn't injured for the Brisbane game, was he? Was he just dropped? Would struggle as a result in the midfield, just the lack of resistance there with that, especially after the game he had against the Suns the week prior. That was a selection error.
This team has a history of playing like shit coming out of the bye. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I like to think that having a shit game before the bye makes it less likely to have a shit game after. I think that's still going to be in everyone's memory, and they're going to come out fired up. And as I like to say, ready to do.
Ready to do. Yeah, we haven't said that nearly enough. But that's going to close the book on the progress reports for the buy window of 2025. As I've said before, the next time we'll be doing things like this will be for So You Didn't Crack the 8, where in that week off before the men's finals, we'll do postmortems for the 10 teams that aren't part of September play. Until then, you know where to find us. The conversation continues at Americans Footy across multiple platforms. I am at Benjamin HK01 individually on Twitter.
I am at Castle Media individually on Twitter. Brian Harambe is giving himself a bath right now. He is on Instagram, a cat named Brian. And if you want to help improve our reach, and I mean, if you've listened this far, I would assume so, give us a rating, maybe even leave a comment on, like Apple or Spotify or whichever. I'm going to poach something from Baseball Barbacast. I just want you to leave like the name of an obscure forgotten footy player if you don't want to leave like an actual review, or just make it the subject line or make it your entire review. The sillier, the better. Ideally someone that's like obscure but has played a game within the time that we've been watching footy.
You know what? I'm okay with it being like someone from the 2010s who we didn't watch, because it'll just give us more historical context. So make it weird. Maybe this could be something for like some off-season content where we go through them all and discover these people. But for now, I'll just say good time of day.